All right, we're going to complete the square here. Completing the square is something we do when we can't factor. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a trinomial, which in this case is x squared minus 4x minus 6 equals 0, which is in the ax squared plus bx plus c format. And since we can't factor it, we can still get an answer. And we can do that one of two ways, by completing the square or by quadratic formula. We're going to learn both, but we're going to start with completing the square because that's going to be necessary if you ever had to find the equation of a parabola or a circle. You do need to know how to complete the square. So that's what we're going to do here. So we're going to take x squared minus 4x minus 6 equals 0. We make sure it's equal to 0 first. And the first thing we need to do in completing the square is make sure we have a 1 in front of the x squared. If there's not a 1 there, if there's a different number, we'll talk about what to do with that later on, because we can't complete the square without a 1 in front of x squared. But in this case, we do have a 1 in front of our x squared, so we're going to move on to our next step, which is just simply adding the c term to the other side. So we add 6 to both sides, pretty simple. And then comes probably the most complicated idea, not something I would expect anyone to know on their own, but it's a way of manipulating the problem to make it work for us. We take our b term, which is negative 4, and we take half of it. So half of negative 4 is negative 2, and we square that. Negative 2 squared is positive 4. And we add 4 to both sides. So we're getting this number here and this number here by taking half the middle term, squaring it, and adding that term. It's always going to be positive because we square it. Now, on this side, we're going to factor. X squared minus 4x plus 4 actually factors to x minus 2 times x minus 2. It always factors to a binomial squared. To do it a little quicker, though, you actually can always just take half the middle term and put it right here with that same sign. So instead of having to factor it, we can take half this middle term and put it here every single time. And on the other side, we just kind of close up 6 plus 4, and that equals 10. Then, to get rid of the square, because now we're going to solve for x, we take the square root of both sides. When you take the square root of a square, you get what's left without the exponent. So we get x minus 2. And then when you take the square root of a number when you're solving for x, it's always a plus minus. If we can simplify this radical, we do so. But if you can't simplify it, you just leave it. And then we just add 2 to the other side, and that's our answer, 2 plus or minus root 10. That's why factoring doesn't work. There'd be no way of guessing these two numbers. Okay, so 2 plus root 10 and 2 minus root 10 are my answers, and we need to be aware that this is a lot of times what our answer is going to look like. So that's how you complete the square. So here are 2 more examples of what we just did of completing the square. We make sure we have a 1 in front of our x squared. We're going to add 2 to both sides, so we get x squared plus 8x equals 2. And then we take half that middle term, so half of positive 8 is 4, and we square it. 4 squared is 16. So in this case, we have it at 16 here, and then because it's algebra, we got to add 16 on this side. When I factor this, I get x plus 4 squared. It's always half of this term. And here, 2 plus 16 is 18. We take the square root of both sides. We get x plus 4 because the square goes away. And we simplify root 18. Root 18 simplifies to be 3 root 2. And we always put a plus or minus in front of a radical. And then we just subtract the 4 over. So negative 4 plus or minus 3 root 2 is our answer. Here, we're going to get an imaginary number in our answer. We're going to first make sure there's a 1 in front of our x squared, which there is. Then we subtract 20 to both sides to get it over. Half of negative 6 is negative 3, and negative 3 squared is plus 9. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides, and if you notice when I factor it, I get x minus 3. The b term cut in half with the same sign. Negative 20 plus 9 combines to be negative 11. Then we take the square root of both sides, and we get x minus 3 on this side. On this side, we can't break down root 11, but if there's a negative under a radical, we put an I outside the radical. And once again, when we take the square root and we're solving for an x, it's always plus or minus. And then I finish it off by adding 3 to both sides. So my answers are x equals 3 plus or minus root 11. And that is how you complete the square when there's a 1 in front of your x squared.